The gunshot that killed Georgia Ramirez's father echoed through the canyon for what felt like forever. And when the silence finally settled over their small ranch outside San Jose, California, she realized she was alone for the first time in her 22 years. The funeral was simple, attended by neighbors who came from miles around to pay their respects to the man who had built his small cattle operation with nothing but determination and borrowed money. Georgia stood beside the grave in her black dress, her dark hair pulled back severely from her face, accepting condolences with a numbness that frightened her. Her father had been everything to her after her mother died, bringing her into the world. And now the ranch that had been his dream sat on her shoulders like an impossible weight. 3 weeks after they buried him, Georgia sat at the kitchen table with papers spread before her, the lamp flickering as the oil ran low. The numbers did not make sense no matter how many times she added them. Cattle prices were down, feed costs were up, and the bank note her father had taken to expand the herd was coming due in 6 months. She pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars, refusing to cry because crying would not solve anything. The knock at her door came just after dawn the next morning. Georgia answered it with her father's rifle in hand, not because she expected trouble, but because trouble had a way of finding women alone on isolated ranches. The man on her porch held his hat in his hands and looked at her with eyes the color of creek water after spring rain. "Miss Ramirez," he said, his voice rough like gravel under wagon wheels. "My name is Aaron Foster. I own the spread about 15 miles northeast of here, up near the foothills. I heard about your father and I wanted to pay my respects, even though they come late." Georgia lowered the rifle slightly but did not invite him in. "Thank you. That is kind of you." Aaron Foster was tall and lean, probably around 30, with sun-darkened skin and the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor work. His clothes were clean but worn, his boots scuffed but well-maintained. He did not look like a rich man, but he looked like a careful one. "I also heard you might be looking to sell," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "If that is the case, I would like to make you a fair offer." "I am not selling," Georgia said immediately, even though she had lain awake the past 3 nights considering exactly that option. Aaron nodded slowly. "I understand, but if you change your mind, the offer stands. Your father had good land and good water. That is worth something, especially in a dry year like this one." After he left, Georgia stood on her porch watching his horse disappear down the dusty road toward town. San Jose was growing, changing from the small pueblo it had been when she was a child into something bigger and louder. The gold rush had brought people flooding into California 20 years ago, and though the easy gold was long gone, people kept coming. Her father had always said the real gold was in the land, in raising cattle to feed the miners and the merchants, and the railroad workers pushing their iron rails across the continent. The problem was that raising cattle required money Georgia did not have, and help she could not afford to hire. Her father's 2 ranch hands had moved on after his death, seeking steadier employment. She had managed to keep the horses fed and the water tanks full, but moving cattle, repairing fences, all the endless work that a ranch required, it was too much for one woman alone. A week after Aaron Foster's visit, Georgia rode into San Jose to meet with the banker. The town sat in the valley with the mountains rising in the distance, streets dusty and crowded with wagons and horses. She tied her mare outside the bank and walked in with her head high, ignoring the stares from men who thought a young woman had no business conducting financial affairs alone. The banker, a portly man named Mr. Whitmore, looked at her over his spectacles with poorly concealed condescension. "Miss Ramirez, I am afraid the bank cannot extend your father's note any further without significant collateral. We have been more than patient. My father's land is worth 3 times what he owes you, Georgia said, keeping her voice steady. The cattle alone would cover the debt if you gave me time to drive them to market. But you have no crew to drive cattle, do you? And the fall sale is months away. I am sorry, but the bank needs security. If you cannot make a payment within 60 days, we will have no choice but to foreclose. Georgia left the bank feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. 60 days. She had 60 days to save everything her father had worked for, or she would lose it all. The afternoon heat pressed down on her as she walked toward the general store, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. Miss Ramirez. She turned to find Aaron Foster leading his horse down the street toward her. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. I saw your mare outside the bank. I hope your business went well. Well enough, Georgia lied, pride keeping her from admitting the truth to a virtual stranger. Aaron studied her face for a moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he could see right through her. I am about to get some lunch at the hotel restaurant. Would you join me? It would give us a chance to talk business. Georgia knew she should refuse, knew that being seen dining alone with a man would set tongues wagging, but hunger and desperation made her nod. All right, but I am buying my own meal. The hotel restaurant was half full, mostly men in dusty trail clothes eating quickly between errands. Aaron led her to a table near the window and pulled out her chair before sitting across from her. When the waitress came, he ordered roast beef and coffee. Georgia asked for the same, even though her stomach was too tight with worry to feel hungry. I will be direct, Aaron said once the waitress left. I know you met with Whitmore, and I know he probably gave you a deadline. I have dealt with him before. He is not a patient man, especially with people he thinks cannot pay. Georgia's pride flared. My father always paid his debts. I know he did. Miguel Ramirez had a reputation as an honest man, which is worth more than gold out here. Aaron leaned forward, his expression serious. But you are in a difficult position, and I want to help if you will let me. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. Aaron was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. After the war, I came out here with nothing but what I could carry. Your father was one of the first ranchers to treat me like a man instead of a nuisance. He sold me my first breeding bull on credit, told me to pay when I could. It took me 3 years, but I paid every cent, and he never once pressed me for it. I owe him, which means I owe you. Their food arrived, and Georgia picked at her meal while Aaron explained his idea. He would help her work her ranch, providing hands from his own crew and expertise she lacked, in exchange for a partnership agreement. They would pool their cattle for the fall drive, split the profits proportionally, and if she agreed, he would loan her enough to make a payment to the bank and buy her some time. Why not just buy my land like you originally offered? Georgia asked. This seems like more work for you with less benefit. Because it is not about benefit, Aaron said simply. It is about doing right by your father's memory, and because I think you deserve a chance to keep what is yours if you want it. Georgia looked out the window at the dusty street, at the people going about their business in the afternoon heat. Her father had built his ranch from nothing, had poured his life into that land. The thought of losing it made her chest ache, but the thought of being indebted to Aaron Foster scared her almost as much. I need to think about it, she said finally. Aaron nodded. That is fair, but do not take too long. 60 days goes by faster than you think. That night, Georgia lay in her childhood bed listening to the wind rattle the windows and thought about trust. Her father had trusted Aaron Foster enough to extend him credit, which was not something he did lightly. And if she was honest with herself, she had no other options. Pride would not save her ranch. She rode out to Aaron's property 2 days later, following his directions into the foothills where the land turned rocky and wild. His ranch was smaller than she expected, but everything she saw was well maintained and organized. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, the barn was freshly painted, and the house, though modest, looked solid and cared for. Aaron came out when he heard her horse, wiping his hands on a rag. "Miss Ramirez, this is a pleasant surprise." "I want to accept your offer," Georgia said without preamble. "But I want everything in writing, and I want it clear that this is a business partnership, not charity." Something that might have been respect crossed Aaron's face. "I would not have it any other way. Come inside and we will work out the details." They spent the afternoon hammering out an agreement at his kitchen table. Aaron wrote in a clear, careful hand, and he listened to every concern Georgia raised, adjusting terms until she felt satisfied. By the time the sun started to sink toward the horizon, they had an agreement that felt fair to both of them, and Georgia had a check that would keep the bank off her back for another few months. "I will send 3 of my men over tomorrow to start on your fence repairs," Aaron said as she prepared to leave. "And we should move your cattle closer to the homestead where we can keep better watch on them. There have been reports of rustlers working the area." "I can help with that," Georgia said quickly, not wanting him to think she expected to sit back while others did the work. "I know you can," Aaron said. "I have heard you can ride and rope as well as any hand. We will need that skill." The compliment, simple and matter-of-fact, warmed something in Georgia's chest that had been cold since her father died. She rode home through the gathering dusk, feeling something she had not felt in weeks: hope. Aaron's men arrived at dawn the next day, 3 weather-beaten cowboys who treated Georgia with courteous respect and got straight to work. Aaron came with them, riding a big bay gelding and carrying tools in his saddlebags. He surveyed the property with a critical eye, making notes about what needed immediate attention and what could wait. "Your father built well," he said as they walked the fence line together. "The bones are good. We just need to shore things up." Working alongside Aaron and his crew, Georgia fell into a routine. She rose before dawn to cook breakfast for everyone, then spent the day riding and working alongside the men. Aaron never asked her to stay behind or do lighter work because she was a woman. He simply assigned tasks based on skill and need, and Georgia found herself respected for her abilities rather than dismissed because of her gender. As the weeks passed, she learned more about Aaron Foster. He had fought for the Union during the war, though he rarely spoke of it except to mention places he had seen. After his discharge, he had worked as a ranch hand throughout Colorado and Wyoming before drifting into California 5 years ago. He had built his spread slowly, carefully, buying land and cattle bit by bit as he saved money. He had never married, though he was certainly old enough and successful enough to attract a wife. "Never found the right woman," he said one evening when they were riding back from checking water tanks in the far pasture. "Or maybe never had the time to look properly. Building a ranch takes all the hours God gives you and then some." "My father used to say the same thing," Georgia said. "He said the land was a jealous mistress. Your father was a wise man." Aaron glanced at her in the fading light. "You have his eyes, you know, same determination." Georgia felt heat rise in her cheeks and blamed it on the sun. "He would have liked knowing someone was helping me keep his dream alive." "I think he would have liked knowing you were fighting for it yourself," Aaron said. "The helping is just practical sense." The cattle drive they organized in October brought together herds from 5 ranches, including Georgia's and Aaron's combined stock. It was a grueling week of long days and short nights, pushing several hundred head of cattle toward the railroad depot in San Jose, where buyers from San Francisco waited. Georgia rode drag position, eating dust and chasing down strays, but she never complained. Aaron worked beside his men, never asking them to do anything he would not do himself, and Georgia saw the respect his crew had for him. Around the campfire at night, the men told stories and played cards while Georgia sat slightly apart, aware that she was the only woman in a camp full of rough men. But Aaron always positioned himself between her and the others, not obviously protective but present in a way that made her feel safe. They talked quietly about the ranch, about plans for spring breeding and where to focus their improvements, and Georgia found herself looking forward to those conversations more than was probably wise. The sale went better than expected. Cattle prices had rebounded, and the buyers were eager for quality stock. When Aaron handed Georgia her share of the profits, she stared at the bank draft in disbelief. "This is enough to pay off the bank note completely," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "with money left over." "Your father raised good cattle," Aaron said, "and you kept them in good condition through a hard season. You earned every cent of that." Georgia rode to the bank the next day with Aaron accompanying her, ostensibly because he had business in town, but really, she suspected, because he wanted to see her settle her debt. Mr. Whitmore's expression when she handed him the payment in full was worth every moment of doubt and fear she had endured over the past months. "Miss Ramirez," the banker said, clearly surprised, "this is quite unexpected." "Is it?" Georgia said sweetly. "I told you my father's ranch was sound." "Perhaps next time you will have more faith." As they left the bank, Aaron made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You enjoyed that." "I did," Georgia admitted. "Is that wrong?" "Not even a little bit." With the debt cleared, Georgia felt like she could breathe properly for the first time since her father died. The ranch was truly hers now, free and clear, and with the money left over from the cattle sale, she could afford to hire a permanent hand and make some needed improvements. But the thought of ending her partnership with Aaron left her strangely hollow. They had dinner that night at the hotel to celebrate, and this time Georgia did not worry about the propriety of being seen with him. Aaron had become her friend over the past months, one of the few people she trusted completely. They talked easily over roast chicken and potatoes, discussing plans for the winter and laughing over stories from the cattle drive. "What will you do now?" Aaron asked as they lingered over coffee. "Now that the ranch is secure, keep working," Georgia said. "There is always work to be done. And I was thinking, if you are willing, that we should continue our partnership. It worked well this year." Something shifted in Aaron's expression, a warmth entering his eyes that made Georgia's breath catch. "I would like that. I have gotten used to seeing you most days. It would feel strange to stop." "Just used to seeing me," Georgia heard herself say, her boldness surprising her. Aaron's hand moved across the table to cover hers, rough calluses warm against her skin. "No, not just that. I have come to care for you, Georgia, more than is probably appropriate given our business arrangement. If that makes you uncomfortable, I apologize, but I wanted to be honest." Georgia's heart hammered against her ribs. She had been trying not to acknowledge her own growing feelings, telling herself it was gratitude or respect or anything other than the truth. But sitting across from Aaron in the lamplight, his hand warm on hers, she could not lie to herself anymore. "It does not make me uncomfortable," she said quietly. "It makes me glad, because I have come to care for you too." Aaron's smile transformed his serious face into something beautiful. "Then perhaps we should discuss expanding our partnership beyond business. What did you have in mind?" "Dinner like this, but calling it courting instead of business. Spending time together because we want to, not because the cattle need moving. Seeing where this goes if you are willing. Georgia thought of her father, of how he had always told her to trust her instincts about people. Her instincts told her that Aaron Foster was a good man, honest and hardworking and kind. They told her that the warmth she felt when he was near was something worth exploring. "I am willing," she said, turning her hand to lace her fingers through his. "Very willing." Courting Aaron Foster was nothing like the romantic stories Georgia had read in books. There were no grand gestures or flowery declarations. Instead, there was the steady accumulation of small moments. Aaron riding out of his way to check on her, bringing supplies when he came so she would not have to make the trip to town alone. Georgia packing extra food when she cooked, riding over to Aaron's place to share supper and conversation. They worked together during the day and sat on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing while the sun set over the valley. Winter brought rain to California, the dry hills turning green almost overnight. Georgia and Aaron spent cold, wet days riding fences and moving cattle to higher ground, coming home muddy and exhausted but satisfied. Aaron was teaching her things her father had never known about breeding programs and pasture rotation, knowledge he had picked up from ranchers in other states. Georgia shared her father's understanding of the local water sources and the patterns of the seasons in their particular valley. On Christmas Eve, Aaron arrived at Georgia's ranch with a small pine tree tied to his saddle. "I thought you should not spend the holiday alone," he said, helping her set it up in her front room. They decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments Georgia made while Aaron carved small wooden stars. It was simple and homemade, but it made the house feel less empty. They ate dinner together, and afterward Aaron produced a small wrapped package. "I am not much for gift-giving," he said, looking almost nervous. "But I saw this and thought of you." Inside the paper was a carved wooden box, the lid inlaid with a delicate pattern of stars. Georgia opened it to find it lined with soft fabric, perfect for storing precious things. "Aaron, it is beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "I made it during the evenings," he admitted. "Needed something to do with my hands while I was thinking." "Thinking about what? About you. About us. About the future I would like to have if you want the same thing." Georgia set the box carefully on the table and moved closer to Aaron, close enough to see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "What future is that?" "One where I get to wake up next to you every morning," Aaron said, his voice rough with emotion. "Where we build something together, not just a ranch but a life. I know we have not been courting long, but I am 32 years old and I know my own mind. I love you, Georgia. I think I have since the day you answered your door with a rifle in your hands and fire in your eyes." Georgia's eyes stung with tears, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I love you too. I have been afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or too much, but I do. I love you." Aaron kissed her then, gentle and careful as if she were something precious. Georgia melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for the first time since her father died, she felt truly home. They married in February in the small church in San Jose, with half the ranchers in the valley in attendance. Georgia wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her by a seamstress in town, and carried wildflowers that Aaron had ridden into the hills to pick himself. The priest who performed the ceremony had known her father and spoke briefly about how Miguel would have been proud to see his daughter marrying such a good man. Aaron moved into Georgia's ranch house, though they spent time at both properties depending on where work needed doing. They hired 2 permanent hands and began the careful work of integrating their 2 operations. It was not always easy. They had different methods and different priorities, and there were days when they argued over the best way to handle a problem. But they always talked it through, always found compromise, and Georgia discovered that having a partner made both the work and the life infinitely better. Spring brought new calves, and the exhausting work of branding and vaccinating. Georgia worked alongside the men, and Aaron never once suggested she should stay behind. They fell into bed each night too tired to do more than hold each other, but those quiet moments became some of Georgia's favorites. Aaron would tell her about his day, about small problems solved or challenges ahead, and she felt the bone-deep satisfaction of being truly known by another person. In May, Georgia realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be sure before telling Aaron, and when she did, his whoop of joy echoed across the valley. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "A real family." "We are already a real family," Georgia said, touching his face. "But yes, we are going to have a baby." Aaron became even more protective after that, though he tried to hide it. He took on the heavier tasks without being asked, brought her water when she was working, and worried constantly that she was doing too much. Georgia tolerated it because she knew it came from love, though she firmly drew the line when he suggested she stop riding. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him. "Women have been working while pregnant since the beginning of time. I will be fine." "I know," Aaron said. "I just cannot help worrying. You and this baby are everything to me." The summer heat grew oppressive as Georgia's belly swelled. She moved more slowly now, but she still kept the books and managed the household and rode out to check on the closer pastures. Aaron hired additional help to pick up the slack, and their combined ranch operation was proving more profitable than either property had been separately. In early September, on a day when the heat shimmered off the ground in visible waves, Georgia's water broke while she was hanging laundry. Aaron was out riding the fence line with the hands, and for a moment Georgia felt a spike of fear. But then her practical nature took over, and she sent the youngest hand racing to find Aaron while she went inside to prepare. The midwife from town arrived before Aaron did, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered half the babies in the valley. She examined Georgia with efficient hands and pronounced everything progressing normally. Aaron burst through the door wild-eyed and pale, sliding to his knees beside the bed where Georgia was laboring. "I am here," he said, taking her hand. "I am right here." "I can see that," Georgia managed between contractions. "You look terrible." "You look beautiful," Aaron said, and meant it. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Aaron never left her side, letting her squeeze his hand until his fingers went numb, wiping her face with cool cloths and murmuring encouragement when she was sure she could not go on. When their son finally slid into the world just after dawn, his angry cry was the most beautiful sound Georgia had ever heard. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced, laying the baby on Georgia's chest. "Strong and healthy." Georgia looked down at the tiny red face, at the small fists waving in outrage at being expelled from his warm home, and fell completely in love. Aaron touched the baby's head with one gentle finger, his eyes suspiciously bright. "He is perfect," Aaron whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you." They named him Miguel, after Georgia's father, and he proved to be a determined baby who knew what he wanted and was not shy about demanding it. Georgia had never been so exhausted in her life, but she had also never been happier. Aaron was a devoted father, walking the floor with Miguel at night so Georgia could sleep, changing diapers without complaint, and talking to his son about cattle and horses, and the ranch as if the baby could understand every word. "You are going to spoil him," Georgia said one evening, watching Aaron cradle the sleeping baby. "Impossible," Aaron said. "He is our son. He deserves to know he is loved. As Miguel grew from a baby into a toddler, Georgia and Aaron expanded their ranch operations further. They bought additional land when a neighboring property went up for sale, and their cattle operation became one of the most respected in the valley. Aaron's careful breeding program was producing exceptional stock, and Georgia's head for numbers kept them profitable even in difficult years. Miguel took his first steps chasing after the barn cats, said his first word pointing at a horse, and generally proved himself to be his parents' son in his love of the ranch and everything on it. By the time he was 3, he could sit a horse with Aaron's help and knew the names of all the cattle in the home pasture. On Miguel's 3rd birthday, Georgia discovered she was pregnant again. This time she told Aaron immediately, and his reaction was just as joyful as the first time. They lay in bed that night with Miguel asleep between them, planning for the future. 2 children, Aaron said wonderingly. 4 years ago I was alone, and now look at us. You ever regret it? Georgia asked. Taking on my problems, tying yourself to me when you could have had an easier life. Aaron propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her seriously. Georgia, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Miguel and this new baby, you are my life. I have never regretted a single moment, and I never will. Their daughter was born in late winter, arriving quickly and easily as if she knew they were old hands at this now. She had George's dark hair and Aaron's blue eyes, and they named her Rosa after Aaron's mother who had died when he was young. Rosa proved to be a quieter child than her brother, content to watch the world with solemn eyes, while Miguel raced around creating cheerful chaos. Georgia juggled motherhood and ranch management with a skill that amazed Aaron, though she insisted she was just doing what needed doing. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and love. Miguel grew tall and lanky, learning to rope and ride and work alongside the hands. Rosa surprised them all by showing a gift for gentling horses, able to calm even the most fractious animal with her quiet presence. Aaron's hair began to show threads of silver at the temples, and Georgia noticed laugh lines around her own eyes when she looked in the mirror. They added onto the house, building more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. They invested in better breeding stock and fenced more pasture. The ranch that Georgia's father had started as a dream became a legacy, something solid and successful that would pass to Miguel and Rosa, and, God willing, to their children after that. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Aaron took Georgia up into the hills above the ranch where they could see both their original properties spread out below them. The valley was green from winter rain, dotted with their cattle, and the house looked small and perfect in the distance. "Do you remember the day we met?" Aaron asked, his arm around Georgia's waist. "You answered the door ready to shoot me." "I remember thinking you had kind eyes," Georgia admitted, "and being angry at myself for noticing when I was trying to be all business. I took one look at you and knew my life was about to change," Aaron said. "I told myself I was just helping out of respect for your father, but that was a lie. I wanted to be near you. I wanted to know you. I wanted exactly what we have now." Georgia leaned into her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "The town called me too quiet after my father died," she said softly. "Everyone thought I should be louder in my grief, more demonstrative, but you understood that quiet was what I needed. You gave me space to breathe and work through my pain. You gave me exactly what I needed when I needed it." "You did the same for me," Aaron said. "I had been alone so long I thought that was just how my life would be. But you showed me what it means to really share a life with someone, to build something together. You made me whole." They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Below them, they could see Miguel riding toward the barn, Rosa walking beside him. Their children, their ranch, their life together. "I love you," Georgia said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Aaron said, turning her in his arms to kiss her properly. "You are everything to me, always." The quiet that had once felt like loneliness now felt like peace. The ranch that had been a burden was now a joy, and the stranger who had knocked on her door offering help had become the center of her world. Georgia thought of her father, hoped he could see what his ranch had become, what his daughter had found. She thought he would be proud. As darkness fell and stars began to appear, Georgia and Aaron rode back down to the house together, toward the warm lights and the sound of their children's laughter. Tomorrow there would be work to do, challenges to face, the endless demands of the ranch and the life they had built. But tonight there was just this, the two of them together, exactly as they were meant to be. Miguel was 7 now and Rosa 5, both of them growing faster than seemed possible. Miguel had his father's serious nature and his mother's determination, already talking about the improvements he would make to the ranch when he was grown. Rosa remained quiet but fiercely loving, her small hands surprisingly strong and capable when she helped with the horses. Georgia taught both children to read and write, determined that they would have the education she had cobbled together from her father's small library and occasional lessons in town. Aaron taught them about the land, about reading the weather and understanding the needs of animals, about the hard work and honest dealing that made a ranch successful. Together, they were raising children who understood the value of what they had and the responsibility that came with it. The ranch continued to prosper. Aaron's breeding program gained recognition throughout the state, and buyers came from as far as Oregon to purchase his bulls. Georgia's management kept them profitable through droughts and market downturns, her careful planning and frugality paying dividends when other ranchers struggled. They were not rich by any means, but they were successful and secure, and that was more than many could say. When Miguel turned 10, Aaron gave him his own horse and his own responsibilities around the ranch. The boy took to it with enthusiasm, rising before dawn to handle his chores before breakfast, working alongside the hands after his lessons were finished. Georgia watched her son becoming a man and felt pride mingled with a bittersweet awareness of how quickly time was passing. Rosa, at 8, announced that she wanted to train horses, not just gentle them but really train them. Aaron built her a round pen and gave her a green broke filly to work with, supervising carefully but letting Rosa figure things out on her own. The patience and intuition she showed amazed them both, and by the time Rosa was 10, people were bringing her horses that other trainers had given up on. Georgia turned 33 that year, and Aaron 35. They were young still, but the years of hard work showed in Aaron's weathered face and Georgia's calloused hands. They had built something real and lasting, something that would outlive them, and the satisfaction of that sustained them through difficult days. The spring that Miguel turned 12 brought a drought that tested everything they had built. The winter rains failed, and by April the grass was brown and the water tanks were low. Aaron and the hands spent long days hauling water from their spring to keep the cattle alive, while Georgia worked with pencil and paper to figure out how to stretch their resources until the rains returned. "We might have to sell some of the herd," she told Aaron one evening, hating to say it but knowing they might have no choice. "Not yet," Aaron said, though she could see the worry in his eyes. "We have enough water for another month if we are careful. Maybe the rains will come." Miguel, listening from the doorway where he was supposed to be asleep, spoke up. "What if we drove the cattle up to the high pasture near the old Wilson place? There is water there, and grass because it is higher and cooler." Aaron and Georgia looked at each other. The high pasture had been abandoned for years after Wilson died, but the boy was right that it had better water and forage. It would be a hard drive and would require someone staying up there with the cattle, but it might save their herd. "That is good thinking, son," Aaron said. "Real good thinking." They made the drive 2 weeks later, the whole family working together to push the cattle into the hills. It was exhausting work, but when they reached the high pasture and saw the grass and the water, Georgia could have wept with relief. Aaron and 2 of the hands stayed up there with the cattle while Georgia, Miguel, and Rosa returned to the home ranch to manage things there. The separation was hard. Georgia had not spent more than a night apart from Aaron since they married, and she found herself missing him with a sharpness that surprised her. But she kept busy, kept moving, and tried not to worry too much about what would happen if the drought continued. The rains came in late May, sudden and fierce, turning the dry earth to mud and filling the tanks to overflowing. Aaron brought the cattle back down a week later, the whole herd healthy and intact, and Georgia ran out to meet him despite the rain, throwing her arms around him before he could even dismount. "I missed you," she said against his wet shirt. "I missed you too," Aaron said, holding her tight. Every single day. That night, after the children were asleep and the rain drummed steadily on the roof, Aaron and Georgia lay tangled together in their bed, relearning each other after their weeks apart. There was an urgency to their lovemaking that had not been there in years, a desperate need to reaffirm their connection, and afterward Georgia cried a little from the sheer relief of having him home. "I am not going anywhere," Aaron murmured, wiping her tears with gentle fingers. "I am right here always." The years continued their steady march. Miguel grew tall and broad-shouldered, the image of his father but with his mother's dark coloring. He courted and married a rancher's daughter from the next valley, a capable young woman named Sarah who fit seamlessly into their family. Rosa, at 15, was already known as the best horse trainer in 3 counties, and young men were starting to notice her despite Aaron's scowling protectiveness. Georgia and Aaron became grandparents when Miguel and Sarah had a daughter they named Georgia, after her grandmother. Holding that tiny baby, seeing her son as a father, Georgia felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that was both beautiful and humbling. "We did all right," Aaron said, watching Miguel cradle his daughter with careful hands. "Raised a good man." "We did," Georgia agreed, "and we are not done yet. Rosa still needs raising, and who knows what adventures are ahead." Rosa married at 18 to a quiet young man who worked with horses and understood her need to pursue her passion. They built a house on the far end of the ranch property, close enough to help but far enough for privacy, and Rosa continued training horses while raising children of her own. Miguel and Sarah eventually took over most of the day-to-day ranch operations, allowing Aaron and Georgia to step back slightly, though neither of them could ever fully retire. They were ranch people to their bones, and the work was too much a part of who they were to ever truly stop. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Aaron took Georgia back up to the spot in the hills where they had stood on their 10th anniversary. They were older now, gray threading through their hair, but the view was just as beautiful and the love between them just as strong. 25 years, Georgia said, shaking her head in wonder. "It feels like no time at all and a lifetime all at once." "Best 25 years of my life," Aaron said. "Every single day with you has been a gift." Georgia leaned against her husband, feeling the solid reality of him, the warmth and strength that had been her anchor through all the years. "Do you remember when you first came to my door? I was so scared, trying so hard to be strong and having no idea what I was going to do. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met," Aaron said. standing there with a rifle you probably were not sure you could use, defending what was yours. I fell in love with you that day, I think, even though I did not let myself acknowledge it for months. The town called me too quiet, Georgia said, the old words coming back to her. But you said that was what you needed. Do you remember? When I asked why you wanted to help me, you said quiet was good, that you had enough noise in your life during the war, that you needed the peace I brought. Aaron was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I did say that, did not I? And it was true. After years of violence and chaos, your quiet strength was like water in the desert. You gave me peace, Georgia. You gave me a home. You gave me the same, Georgia said. When my father died, I thought I would be alone forever. But you showed me that family is not just blood, it is the people who choose to stand beside you. You chose me, and that changed everything. They watched the sun set over their valley, over the ranch they had built together from grief and determination and love. The house below was full now, full of children and grandchildren, full of life and laughter and the comfortable chaos of a family gathering for a celebration. We should get back, Georgia said reluctantly. They will be wondering where we are. Let them wonder a few more minutes, Aaron said, pulling her closer. I want to remember this, just the two of us, before we go back to being surrounded by all those people we love. So they stood together as the stars began to appear, holding each other the way they had for 25 years, the way they would for however many years God granted them. The quiet between them was comfortable and deep, filled with all the words they did not need to say because they knew each other so completely. When they finally rode back down to the house, the party was in full swing. Miguel had barbecued a steer, and tables were loaded with food prepared by every woman in the family. The grandchildren ran shrieking through the yard, and neighbors from miles around had come to celebrate with them. Aaron and Georgia moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, but they kept finding each other across the room, their eyes meeting in moments of private communion. This was what they had built together, not just a successful ranch, but a family, a legacy, a community of people who cared for each other. Late in the evening, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Georgia and Aaron sat on their porch watching the moon rise over the valley. Miguel and Sarah were cleaning up inside, insisting that the guests of honor should rest. I would not change a single thing, Georgia said softly. Not one moment of our life together. Not even the hard parts, Aaron asked. The drought years, the cattle we lost, all those sleepless nights with sick children. Not even those, Georgia said firmly. Because the hard parts made the good parts sweeter. Because we faced everything together and that made us stronger. Because every challenge we overcame proved that what we have is real and lasting. Aaron took her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern of her knuckles. I used to wonder what my life would have been like if I had not come to your door that day. If I had just bought land somewhere else, built my ranch alone. And I cannot even imagine it. You are so much a part of me now that trying to imagine life without you is like trying to imagine breathing without air. You are essential, Georgia. You are everything. Georgia felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears, grateful tears. I love you, Aaron Foster. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too, Aaron said, and kissed her under the rising moon. The years that followed were gentle ones. Aaron and Georgia grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds staying sharp. They watched their grandchildren grow and have children of their own, the ranch passing through generations exactly as they had hoped. Miguel proved to be an excellent manager, expanding the operation while staying true to the values his parents had instilled. Rosa's horse training business became known throughout California, and she traveled to ranches and farms teaching her methods. Georgia's hair went fully gray, and Aaron developed a limp from an old injury that bothered him in cold weather. But they still rode out together when they could, still checked on the cattle and the fences and all the small details that made a ranch run smoothly. The work had been their life for so long that they could not imagine stopping completely. On a warm spring morning 2 years after their 30th anniversary, Aaron did not wake up. Georgia found him peaceful in their bed, his face relaxed in sleep, gone so quietly that she had not even known. The grief that crashed over her was like a physical blow, stealing her breath and dropping her to her knees beside the bed. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of California. Aaron had touched so many lives over his years in the valley, had helped so many people the way he had once helped Georgia, and they all came to pay their respects. Georgia stood beside his grave with her children and grandchildren around her, and felt the terrible emptiness of losing her partner, her love, her other half. The weeks after were the hardest Georgia had ever endured, worse even than losing her father, because Aaron had been with her through that grief, and now she had to face this one alone. She moved through her days automatically, doing what needed doing but feeling like a ghost in her own life. Miguel and Sarah urged her to move into the main house with them, but Georgia refused. She stayed in the house she had shared with Aaron, surrounded by the memories of their life together. At night she lay in their bed and talked to him, telling him about her day, about the grandchildren, about all the small things she would have shared if he were still alive. Slowly, painfully, Georgia found a new normal. The grief did not go away, but it became bearable, a constant companion rather than a crushing weight. She took comfort in the ranch, in the legacy she and Aaron had built together. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, passing down stories about Aaron so they would remember him clearly. And she rode out to the hills where they had stood together so many times, talking to him in the quiet spaces where she felt his presence most strongly. Georgia lived for another 5 years after Aaron died, years she filled with family and work and quiet contemplation. She saw Miguel's daughter Georgia marry and have children of her own, making Georgia a great-grandmother. She watched Rosa's youngest son take over the horse training business. She sat on the porch in the evenings and remembered all the years she and Aaron had sat there together, and felt grateful for every single one. When Georgia died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 63, her family buried her beside Aaron on the hill overlooking the ranch. The stone they placed bore both their names and a simple inscription. Together they built a legacy of love. The ranch continued, passing to new generations who worked the land and raised their cattle and honored the memory of the couple who had built it all. The story of how Georgia and Aaron met, how they had fallen in love while saving her father's ranch, became family legend, told and retold to children who listened with wide eyes. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right over the valley, people swore they could see 2 figures on horseback riding the hills together, checking their fences and their cattle the way they had for 32 years of marriage. Some said it was just tricks of the light, but those who had known Georgia and Aaron believed differently. They believed that love like that did not end, that bonds forged in hardship and strengthened by years of partnership endured beyond death. The town that had once seemed too quiet to a grieving young woman had become home, filled with the voices of the family she and Aaron created together. The ranch that had been a burden became a blessing, worked by hands that carried Georgia and Aaron's blood and their values. And the stranger who had knocked on her door offering help had given her everything she needed: partnership, love, family, and a legacy that would endure. In the end, Georgia Ramirez and Aaron Foster's story was a simple one, the kind that played out across the American West in 1,000 different ways. Two people found each other, built something together, and loved each other through all the challenges life threw at them. But simple did not mean easy, and it did not mean common. What they built together, the life they shared and the family they raised, was extraordinary in its ordinary goodness. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the ranch today, more than a century after Aaron first rode up to George's door. The land has changed, modernized, adapted to new times and new challenges. But at its heart, it remains the same. A place where hard work and honest dealing matter, where family comes first, where the quiet strength of good people builds something that lasts. And sometimes, on warm spring mornings when the California sun rises over the valley, the light catches the stones on the hill just right, and Georgia and Aaron's names shine like a promise, like a testament to everything a rancher and the woman he loved built together in a town that called her too quiet, in a life that gave him exactly what he needed.